I recently watched the Star Citizen panels about server meshing from last fall, and I've been a backer since 2012. However, after seeing the replication layer and the server meshing demo, I really was quite shocked. Let me give you a little bit of background as to who I am and why I'm making this video. I've been in networking for 30 years. I got my first job in network operations in 1994. I've been working ever since in operations, engineering, architecture, and for the last 12 years, I've been working in automation and software control of networks. Why this is interesting to me is because I have seen a lot of talk about replication layer and about server meshing. I started watching some of the videos. I saw one reaction from a software engineer that was really good. I think there's an aspect of this that has not been getting the coverage it deserves. So what I'd like to do today is spend just a few minutes. I'm not going to take a whole ton of your time, but I'd like to discuss the complexities and intricacies that come from the networking side of the house with this. So to begin that, we need to understand that graph theory is the core of networking. Now, graph theory is very straightforward. You have nodes, which are points in space, and then you have edges, or those connect to nodes. Graph theory is entirely about relationships. So when I was watching this, I had a slightly different take on what we need to keep an eye on moving forward. If we take a very simple graph, and we'll use this for our example today, there are two ways that a graph can be built. The first way is a tree. In this case, a left to right view where there's a hierarchy of membership. This is what you saw on the screen in the demonstration. This is a representation of a graph of a simple network. There are ways to progress in this graph where you can actually loop endlessly. In a tree, you don't have that option. So with those two bits of knowledge, let's take this a step further. If your ship lands on a planet, you move from the orbit of Microtech to the Microtech city node, and then eventually down to the Microtech spaceport node. And even then, you go into your hangar node. And each one of those transition requires changing a vertex in their graph. There are a couple of things that must be maintained for a graph to work effectively. Number one, in this case, it seems that it has to be hierarchical. It has to be a tree. Actually, it has to be multiple trees. You want Microtech to be a tree under Stanton, and then you want Pyro 1 to be a tree under Pyro. And effectively, a jump gate is a way to hand node trees between those two graphs. And that's where my concern lies with where we're going with Star Citizen. It's not about the function of changing the edges, moving them around. I think that's obviously incredibly complex and has never been done in the scale that would be needed for an online game like this, especially one where you're trying to do like FPS across the boundary, right? There's a reason there are loading screens, and this is it. The second piece is what happens at Jump Town? What happens when there's an event or a major battle? You eventually get to a point where the graph becomes indivisible in a meaningful way. If you take 10 ships, and they all have multiple rooms and tons of weapons, even if you take each ship and give it, let's call it 20 internal zones, right? Each room is its own zone. You are, in those individual zones, reducing the computational complexity. However, at some point, all of that replication and that splitting ends up costing you more than you're gaining, because you have to transmit that information, sync that information, and eventually get that information to the end consumer, the player, the edge node, in a way that the player can understand it. And in a way that I can, change my shields before my ship blows up. So there is a finite ability to spread this out. The question is not what is the ability to spread it out. Really, the question is what is the ability to group it together. In my MMO experience, servers don't have issues when players are well distributed across their zones. I don't know if any of you remember, but way back in the day, there was the big Scarab event in WoW, where there was this huge event in one zone, and it totally blew up the servers for a little while. They got it working eventually, but the challenge they had to balance was total server population versus the percentage of that population that might be expected to congregate in one area. SIG will be able to divide that tremendously more than WoW could at the time. No question about it. What we should be focusing on is the group. The coordination between all of those different zones, all those different levels of the tree needs to happen somewhere. And in order to do that, you have to simplify the problem as you go up the stack, which is a whole nother subject to talk about. It's this abstraction, right? From the very detailed, I took a step in the room this way, which no one else cares about, to I push the self-destruct button, which everyone else cares about. So there's a level of abstraction that goes on. I have questions about this because I think from what I'm seeing, they're going to be able to get further along the line than anyone has. And I'm curious to see what the end state is, because this is not a simple problem. Really just boils down to two things. When we're testing, what we need to help the engineering team understand is, first of all, the obvious one. When does the tree break? I moved from X to Y, and I saw a 30K, right? Effectively, that modification to the graph didn't complete properly. That's an obvious one. But the other one to keep our eye on here is, when do we as the end players start to feel the impact of clumping together? I really think that one of the best things we can do as a community is all these massive organizations that are out there, when we start testing the replication layer and eventually the server meshing, just have an org meeting, right? Get as many people as you can on one shard and get as many people as you can in one area, because we need to help them stress this out. Not in a combative way. This is us trying to understand at the same time they're trying to understand. So none of this should be taken as me saying they're going to fail, they're horrible. I can't even really comprehend the work they're doing. It's so amazing to me. We just need to find ways as a community that we can partake in this and not just passively sit back and complain that it isn't moving quick enough. This is the most ambitious private sector change in the way we operate as a community I've ever seen. Think of this like the metaverse, only not stupid. The concept here that they are building towards is not just a space MMO. If they get this right, then down the road, they can sell Blizzard a solar system. And Azeroth can be there with its own rules, its own code, its own capabilities, because in the graph structure, that branch is managed, well, now by Microsoft. But you get my point, right? Yes, this is a space simulation, but what they're building is so much more. I cannot even put it into words. The cross-pollination that this is going to have, that'll ripple across the industry, will be quite profound, even though it's been 12 years since I first contributed. And yes, they have made no end of mistakes. I am not trying to be an apologist, but at this point, they have rebuilt my level of confidence in their work, and they've shown their work enough that I think they are onto something massive. I see so many people in this community go, oh, just get a bigger switch, or, well, maybe they should upgrade to 10 gig. And as a networking person, just stop. Just stop that. This level of problem they're trying to solve has baffled since the Enlightenment. This is not simple stuff they're doing. Frankly, I can't believe they have the guts to try it. So please don't minimize what they're trying to do. All right, that's enough for this. This is my first video. I know it's a mess. I will get better. I'm planning on having more Star Citizen content as things go on. Please feel free to subscribe.